Every person you're about to meet stood in front of a clear warning about a dangerous wild animal, and then stepped past it. Not misfortune, not a freak twist of nature, a decision made in daylight with time to think. From a holidaymaker who turns his back on a wild monkey for a photograph, to a family who lift a living creature out of the sea just to hold it up for the camera. You will hear the same warning ignored again and again in different countries with different animals. And the last one is the one nobody saw coming. It was early February 2016 on Koh Samui in Thailand. Gareth Crowe was 36, a Scottish tourist from Millport on the Isle of Cumbrae, on holiday with his family. The incident happened on a Monday, during a trek near the Namuang waterfall, and though some reports list the date as the 1st of February and others as the 2nd, the outcome is not in dispute. Here is the detail that stays with you. Gareth had a prosthetic leg. Local officials later said he was unable to run away from the elephant, and yet the marketing around him was so smooth, so reassuring, that even a man who could not have fled if his life depended on it was told this was a safe way to spend an afternoon with his family. He was the kind of tourist these camps are built for, someone who trusted the brochure over the biology. The warnings were everywhere, if anyone had cared to read them. Animal welfare groups had been saying it for years. Elephants used for rides are often beaten into obedience, chained, and worked to exhaustion. A stressed captive elephant is not a fairground ride. It is a wild animal holding itself together by a thread, and that thread can snap without notice. Travel advisories said plainly that close contact with trekking elephants is dangerous and should be avoided. Gareth paid his money anyway. He was riding in a seat on the elephant's back with his 16-year-old stepdaughter beside him, and the trek set off along the path near the waterfall. It was meant to be a photograph, a family memory. Somewhere along that trail, the elephant simply had enough. It bolted, then it turned. It gored Gareth with its tusk and brought its full weight down on him, and he died from his injuries. His 16-year-old stepdaughter was thrown from the elephant but survived with injuries, a girl who will carry that afternoon for the rest of her life. Animal rights groups such as PETA later highlighted the case as an example of the risks of elephant rides in Thailand. Entirely preventable. He had climbed onto a stressed captive wild animal after years of public warnings not to. Broader studies of wildlife tourism found that around 3/4 of such attractions involved genuine abuse and real danger to the people who visit them. The elephant was never the problem. It did precisely what an exhausted, mistreated bull elephant does when it reaches breaking point. Gareth Crowe was the variable. He chose to sit on its back, and the animal was blamed for a decision that was never its own. Do subscribe before we go on, because what looks like a run of terrible luck is really the same warning, printed on the same signs, ignored over and over. The next one carried a camera and turned his back on a known biter. It was 2015, turned his back on it, so the monkey would sit behind his shoulder in the frame, and he lifted his phone for the selfie. To the macaque, a human turning away is not a photo opportunity. It is an opening. The animal struck at his face, and Connor came away bloodied with a story he had not planned on telling. He survived. His injuries were relatively minor, and he recovered, which is the only reason this one plays more as a lesson than a tragedy. But the mechanics were identical to the fatal cases. It was 2014, at Newell Beach, near Port Douglas in far north Queensland, Australia. A 35-year-old man decided he would sleep on the sand, close to the waterline. This is croc country, and everyone in the region knows it. The whole of that coastline is stitched with warning signs. Estuarine saltwater crocodiles hunt these shores. They are drawn to the water's edge at night, and the advice could not be plainer. Do not camp near the water. Do not linger at the shoreline after dark. Do not, under any circumstances, lie down and go to sleep beside a crocodile-inhabited beach. He knew all of it, or he had every chance to. He climbed into a sleeping bag and bedded down near the waterline, in the dark, in the exact strip of sand where a saltwater crocodile expects to find its next meal. To an ambush predator, a warm, still shape at the edge of the water is not a sleeping man. It is prey. The crocodile came out of the water and seized him, clamping onto the sleeping bag and beginning to drag him toward the sea, the way these animals drag everything they catch, down and under. And here is the strange twist that saved his life. The very gear he had brought for comfort became the thing that spared him. The crocodile locked onto the thick fabric of the sleeping bag rather than his body, and as it thrashed and tore at the material, the man managed to wriggle out of the bag entirely and scramble away. He survived, injured and badly shaken, while the crocodile was left savaging an empty sleeping bag on the sand. Local authorities treated it as a textbook preventable incident. He had slept at the waterline in a place where the danger was posted on signs he must have passed. The crocodile was never the problem. It was a nocturnal ambush predator doing precisely what it has done for millions of years, responding to a shape at the water's edge. The man was the variable, and he lived only because a sleeping bag took the bite meant for him. It was 2007 on Komodo Island in the national park that carries the same name in Indonesia. This is the hardest one to tell because the person was an 8-year-old boy, and he was not a foolish tourist chasing a photograph. He was a local child living in a village on an island shared with the largest lizards on Earth. I include him because his death is the warning that every reckless visitor to that island has failed to learn from. Komodo dragons are enormous predatory reptiles, fast over short distances, armed with a bite that brings down animals far larger than a small child. The families who live there know the danger intimately. There are warnings about keeping children supervised, about not wandering near the places where the dragons forage, because the dragons do not respect the edge of a village. They come in. On that day, the boy had gone behind a bush on the edge of the village, and a Komodo dragon attacked him there. He was killed. It became one of the most publicized human deaths in the park's history, and it changed how the authorities managed the place, prompting stricter education campaigns for locals and visitors alike about how these animals behave and how quickly they can strike. And yet, year after year, tourists step off the marked paths on that same island to get closer to the very creatures that killed a child who grew up among them. That is the lesson buried in this one. If a boy who lived his whole short life alongside these animals could be taken, no visitor with a camera stands a chance of outguessing them. The dragon was never the problem. It was a wild predator behaving exactly as its kind has always behaved, taking an opportunity when a small, unprotected target came within reach. The tragedy was the proximity, and the proximity was the thing. Every later visitor would treat as optional. It was mid-2000s, and again it was Komodo Island, part of Komodo National Park in Indonesia. But this time, the person was a grown man, an adult tourist who should have known exactly what the ground beneath his feet could do. He had heard the warnings. Everyone who visits that park hears them. Stay with the group. Stay on the marked paths. Keep your distance from the dragons and never approach one on your own. The guides do not say these things for effect. They say them because the boy in the earlier story was not the only one the dragons had taken, and because a Komodo dragon can cover ground faster than a person expects and bite harder than anything on that island. But this man wanted something the group could not give him. He wanted that extra. Left leg was mauled so badly that it took extensive surgery to save what could be saved. Other visitors dragged him clear and got him to medical help, and he survived, carrying the damage for the rest of his life. Park authorities repeated the same instructions that had gone unheeded, about staying on the paths and keeping distance from animals that are exactly as dangerous as they look. The incident was ruled entirely preventable. He had left the group and approached a wild predator alone, for a picture, in a place already infamous for a fatal attack. The dragon was never the problem. It did what a Komodo dragon does when a human strays into its space. The man was the variable, and he traded a leg for a photograph he did not need. It was February 2016 at the Santa Teresita beach in Buenos Aires province, Argentina. There was no fence to climb here, no barrier ignored. What happened was worse in its own way, because it was done by a smiling crowd. A small La Plata dolphin, a shy and vulnerable species that lives in estuaries and near shorelines, had come into the shallows, doing nothing more than being a dolphin close to shore. And a group of holidaymakers took it from the water. They lifted it clear of the sea, this small, fragile animal, and they passed it from hand to hand along the beach so that everyone could take a photograph with it. They crowded around it. They held it aloft in the sun. Nobody needed a posted sign to understand what any child understands, that a dolphin cannot breathe on hot sand and cannot survive being manhandled by a mob. The basic ethics of it, the plain common sense of it, were as clear as any warning could be. Photographs from that day show tourists grinning, posing, holding the animal up for the camera, some accounts describing its tail flapping weakly as it was jostled from person to person. At least one dolphin died as a result of the handling, with reports varying on whether one or two animals were killed that day. The images went around the world and provoked genuine international outrage. Conservation groups condemned it. The bitter irony is that the La Plata dolphin is already a vulnerable species, its numbers under pressure from fishing nets. And here was one killed not by an accident of industry, but by a beach full of people who wanted a picture. The dolphin was never the problem. It was simply where it was meant to be, in the shallows near a shore. The people who lifted it out of the water were the variable, and they mistook a living, breathing wild animal for a souvenir. It was 2016 in Thailand at a tourist elephant venue whose name never reached the public. The man killed there appears in the records not as a person, but as a statistic, an anonymized line in a global report on wildlife tourism. He was a male tourist, drawn to the same kind of attraction that had already killed Gareth Crowe that same year, the same promise of a close encounter with a gentle giant. And the warnings he ignored were, if anything, even louder than the ones Gareth had walked past, because by the time this man arrived, the campaigns were in full voice. International welfare groups were begging tourists to stay away from elephant shows and rides, not only for the sake of the animals, but for the sake of the visitors themselves. The message was blunt. These are wild animals, not props. They are powerful beyond anything a human can control, and they are kept in conditions that make sudden aggression predictable. He went anyway. He stepped in close into the working space of a captive elephant as part of the standard tourist routine, rather than watching from behind a barrier the way any sane person watches a creature that weighs several tons. The elephant trampled him, and he was killed. There is no dramatic detail to dress it up, and that is exactly the point. It was so ordinary, so routine, that a global wildlife tourism study folded it in as one more recent example of the very real danger tourists put themselves in. That same report estimated that up to 550,000 wild animals are suffering in tourist venues around the world at any given moment, kept stressed, kept crowded, and kept within reach of people who mistake them for entertainment. The incident was ruled preventable in every meaningful sense. He entered the striking range of a stressed captive elephant, despite a worldwide campaign telling him not to. The elephant was never the problem. It reacted the way a mistreated, cornered animal reacts when a human crowds its space. The man was the variable, and he did not even leave his name behind, only a warning that the next tourist would ignore just the same. And now the last one, the one I told you was coming. It was in a national park on wide open ground where the rules are printed on every gate and repeated at every entrance. The people you meet here are not chasing one photograph in a temple courtyard. They are standing among some of the largest and most dangerous animals on Earth, and they are stepping toward them on purpose. This is the case that leaves people speechless because there was no ambiguity anywhere in it. The rules in a park like this are not fine print. Do not leave your vehicle. Stay on the designated trails. Keep well back from the wildlife. Do not attempt to touch or feed the animals. These instructions are explained again and again precisely because the creatures behind them can kill a grown man in seconds. And still, visitors climbed out of the safety of their vehicles and off the marked trails, walking toward lions, elephants, bison, and bears, on foot for the perfect shot, some of them turning their backs within striking distance to line up a selfie. The animals reacted the only way wild animals react to a human suddenly inside their space. They charged, they trampled, they gored, and they mauled, and people were left with catastrophic injuries, and some did not survive at all. What makes this the one nobody saw coming is who these people were. Several were seasoned travelers, experienced visitors who had read the signs a dozen times and still decided the rules were meant for someone less capable than themselves. Familiarity did not save them. It made them careless. Park authorities investigated case after case and reached the same verdict every time, entirely preventable. The animals were behaving normally, and the humans had created the danger the moment they stepped past the line. The animals were never the problem. The lion defending its territory, the bison guarding its space, the elephant standing its ground, every one of them did exactly what its species does. The people were the variable, and they crossed the one line that no photograph could ever make worth crossing.
It was the 7th of July, 2024, at Pilanesberg Game Reserve in South Africa, one of the most popular self-drive parks on the continent. Carlos Luna was 43, a Spanish tourist on the trip of a lifetime with his fiancée beside him in the passenger seat. He was the kind of man who treated park rules as paperwork for nervous people. The signs at the gate are blunt. Stay in your vehicle, keep your windows up, do not approach the animals. Carlos had read all of it, and he had decided that none of it was meant for someone like him. On that morning, a herd of elephants was crossing near the road, moving calmly, in no hurry, the way elephants do when they feel unbothered. Carlos saw a photograph. He stopped the car, and according to witnesses, his windows were already down, which, on its own, broke the rules. Then he did the thing that the entire park is designed to prevent. He opened the door and stepped out onto the road, camera up, and started walking toward the herd. People in the surrounding vehicles understood immediately what they were watching. They shouted. They waved their arms. They leaned out and yelled at him to get back in his car. Carlos kept walking. To him, the warnings were just noise from tourists who didn't understand wildlife the way he did. One of the cows in the herd turned. When an elephant decides a person on foot is a threat to her family, the distance closes faster than a human mind can process. She covered the ground between them in seconds. Carlos was knocked off his feet and trampled, and it happened in full view of his fiancée and a row of horrified strangers who had done everything short of physically dragging him back. He died there, on the road, in a park that had told him exactly how to stay alive. The Northwest Parks and Tourism Board later confirmed he had left his vehicle and approached the herd despite repeated warnings, and that he had violated multiple park rules in doing so. The incident was classified as entirely preventable. He left a vehicle in an active wildlife zone, on foot, after being warned to take a photograph. The elephant was never the problem. She was a mother standing between a stranger and her herd, doing precisely what her species has done for millions of years. Carlos was the variable. If you're already shaking your head at how a grown man ignores a warning that loud, you're not alone. So subscribe and stay with me, because the next one is worse. It was the 11th of November, 2017, at the Mora River Lodge near Livingstone, Zambia, a place that markets itself on close contact with the wild. The Dutch woman at the center of this case was an adult tourist whose name was never made public, but everything that happened that day came down to one belief, the same belief that runs through every story in this video. The belief that a calm animal is a safe animal. She was at a lodge, not deep in the bush, which somehow made the danger feel smaller than it was. A wild elephant bull was nearby, and she saw a chance for a closer picture, so she walked toward it, on foot, leaving the safe ground behind, narrowing the gap that her own common sense should have kept wide. Her companion saw what was happening and did the thing instinct demands. He moved toward her, apparently to pull her back or warn her off, and in doing so, he put a second person on foot, in the open, within range of an animal that weighs several tons and reacts to perceived crowding as a threat. The bull reacted defensively. It did not need to charge far. Both of them were exposed, and the elephant trampled them. The woman died from her injuries. Her companion was seriously hurt in the same attack, having closed the distance for the most human reason there is, to save someone he cared about. Local police later stated plainly that the victims had gone too close to the elephant while trying to take photographs. There was no provocation beyond proximity. There was no malice in the animal. There was only a person who treated a wild bull elephant as a backdrop, and a moment where two people stood where no person on foot should ever stand. The elephant was not removed, not hunted, not punished, because there was nothing to punish. It had reacted to a threat that walked up to it on its own two legs. The incident was preventable in the simplest way imaginable. Stay back from wild elephants. She didn't. And what makes this case sting is the ordinariness of it. There were no extreme conditions, no failed equipment, no chain of bad luck, just a closer angle that wasn't worth a human life. The elephant was never the problem. It did exactly what a startled bull does when something small and unpredictable steps into its space. She was the variable, and her companion paid part of the price for trying to undo a decision that was already made. It was the 2nd of May, 2018, on a safari in Botswana, when Carlos Carvalho learned the lesson that so many people refuse to learn until it's too late. Carvalho was 47, a South African filmmaker, an award-winning one, a man whose entire career was built on getting closer to the shot than anyone else would dare. That instinct serves you well behind a lens in controlled conditions. In elephant country, it kills you. Carvalho was out on safari with a group, and the vehicle did the one thing every experienced guide warns against. It stopped too close to an elephant. There is a comforting myth among tourists that sitting inside a vehicle makes a close approach safe, that the metal in the engine creates some invisible boundary the animal respects. It does not. An elephant does not see a land cruiser as a vehicle. It sees a large object that has invaded its space, and when it feels crowded, it responds to the whole thing as a single threat. The elephant charged. It struck the vehicle, and Carvalho was fatally injured in the attack. A filmmaker who had spent his life chasing the perfect frame died because the frame he wanted required closing a distance that should never have been closed. The coverage described it as a fatal elephant attack following a vehicle that came too near, and the elephant was not reported killed because the elephant had done nothing wrong. It is one of the most cited reminders in safari safety, precisely because it strips away the false comfort that so many tourists cling to. A vehicle is not a force field. It is a place to sit while you keep your distance, and the moment you erase that distance, the vehicle becomes a metal box that an angry elephant can flip, crush, or charge straight into. Carvalho knew animals. He had built a reputation on filming them, and still, the pull of the closer shot overrode the most basic rule of the bush. The incident was preventable in one line. Keep your distance from elephants, especially when crowding them inside a vehicle. The elephant was never the problem. It defended its space the way elephants do. Carvalho, and the decision to roll up that close, was the variable. It was 2015, on a safari route through lion country, when a tourist decided that a pane of glass was getting in the way of a better photograph. The exact park has never been fully verified, but the act at the heart of it is one that every safari park on Earth posts in giant letters at its entrance. Keep your windows up. The tourist, an adult whose work reportedly included visual effects editing on Game of Thrones, was riding in a vehicle near a lioness resting close to the road. She wasn't hunting. She wasn't agitated. She was doing what lions do most of the day, lying in her own territory, conserving energy in the heat. To the people in the vehicle, she looked almost tame, almost sleepy, and that is the trap that the no open window rule exists to prevent. A photograph through glass has glare and reflection. A photograph through an open window is clean. So the window came down for a sharper image of a fully grown predator just a few feet away. The lioness did not need an invitation. The open window was a door, and to an apex predator, a sudden opening into a vehicle is an opportunity, not a danger. She lunged into the gap and attacked the tourist before anyone could close it, before anyone could react, before the photo was even taken. The park had large warning signs posted along that very route, the kind you cannot miss, the kind written by people who have seen exactly this happen before. None of it mattered against the urge for a better shot. The death was described as entirely avoidable, the direct result of breaking a posted safety rule, and the lioness was not destroyed because she had done nothing a lioness wouldn't do. She had simply taken the opening that a human being handed her. The incident comes down to one sentence. In lion country, the window stays up, no exceptions, no clear shots worth the risk. The lioness was never the problem. She was resting in her own home when a barrier between her and her next meal silently slid open. The person who lowered it was the variable, and it cost everything for a frame that no one will ever see. It was 2024, on the outskirts of Gudari village in Chhattisgarh, India, where a wild elephant had wandered into an area thick with people, phones already raised. The woman at the center of this case has not been publicly named, but her decision is one that has become tragically common in the age of the camera in every pocket. A wild elephant moving through a populated area is one of the most dangerous animals a person can encounter because it is stressed, surrounded, and reacting defensively to crowds it does not understand. Forest Department officials understood this perfectly, and they were doing their job, trying to push the crowd back, trying to keep a safe perimeter, shouting the warnings that exist for exactly this moment. The woman ignored them. She wanted the shot, the close one, maybe a video, maybe a pose with the animal in frame. So she moved forward, toward the elephant, out of the safety the officials were fighting to create, into the space where a single defensive reaction means death. The elephant charged. It killed her, in front of a crowd, many of whom were filming the entire scene rather than helping or stepping back themselves. That detail became the story. The video spread, and it turned this death into a viral example of selfie-risk behavior around wildlife, a phrase that should not need to exist but increasingly does. Officials described it bluntly as a consequence of people ignoring safety instructions in pursuit of photos and videos. The elephant was not reported killed, because the elephant was reacting exactly as a frightened, crowded wild animal reacts. The incident was preventable the moment the officials gave the warning. Stay back. She didn't, and a crowd of cameras recorded the price. The elephant was never the problem. It was surrounded, stressed, and defending itself in a situation people had created around it. She, and the choice to step forward for a video, was the variable. It was 2024, somewhere in India, when a man named Ashok made the same fatal calculation that the woman in Chhattisgarh made that same year, in the same country, around the same kind of animal. The exact location was never clearly recorded, but the pattern is unmistakable because it has become a pattern, a recurring motif in the coverage of these deaths. Ashok wanted a photograph, or a video, of a wild elephant. He was warned not to approach it. The danger of an elephant at close range on foot is not a secret, not a technicality, not something that requires expertise to understand. It is obvious to anyone who looks at the size of the animal. And still, Ashok moved in close, narrowing the distance, raising his camera, trusting that the elephant would tolerate him. It did not. The elephant struck him down and trampled him to death, in the space of a few seconds, the way these deaths almost always unfold, with no time for rescue and no second chance to undo the step that was taken. He was killed for an image. The report framed it exactly as it was, a preventable death in pursuit of a photograph, and no outcome was recorded for the elephant, because there was no fault on the animal's side to answer for. What makes Ashok's case worth telling alongside the others is precisely how unremarkable it is. There was no dramatic backdrop, no famous victim, no viral footage to make it memorable. There was just a man, an elephant, a warning, and a decision to ignore it. He is grouped in the coverage with the other elephant deaths of that year, because the lesson is identical every single time. Do not approach a wild elephant. Do not close the distance for a photo. The animal does not understand your camera, your intentions, or your assumption that it will stay calm. It understands only that something small has entered its space. The incident was preventable in those few words of warning he was given and chose to disregard. The elephant was never the problem. It defended its ground. Ashok, and the step he took to get the shot, was the variable. It was March 2024, on a safari route captured in a video that spread widely afterward, when an 80-year-old woman lost her life to the same mistake that killed Carlos Carvalho 6 years earlier. The exact reserve was never specified, but what happened was recorded and shared, and it carries the same brutal lesson about the false safety of a vehicle. The safari group was riding in a Toyota Land Cruiser, the standard workhorse of the bush, when the vehicle came too close to an elephant. Standard safari distancing rules exist for one reason, and it is this exact scenario. An elephant that feels crowded does not retreat politely. It acts. This one charged the vehicle, and rather than simply striking it, the elephant flipped the Land Cruiser onto its side. Several passengers were injured. The 80-year-old woman was killed. The footage of the attack became the kind of thing that circulates as a warning, the rare case where the public can actually watch the moment a vehicle's supposed safety collapses. An elephant is strong enough to roll a several-ton vehicle the way a person might tip a chair, and once that vehicle is on its side, the people inside have no protection at all. Reporting treated it as a safari vehicle safety failure, a case of getting too near an animal that had every reason to feel threatened. The elephant was not reported killed, because the failure was not the elephant's. The failure was the decision to position a vehicle close enough that a defensive charge could turn deadly. There is a hard truth in this case that tourists resist. The vehicle does not make you safe. The distance makes you safe. Take away the distance and the vehicle becomes a liability, a thing that can be flipped and crushed with everyone inside it. An 80-year-old woman, who likely trusted the people driving and the metal around her, died because that distance was not kept. The incident was preventable in one line. Keep the vehicle back from elephants. The elephant was never the problem. It charged something that had crowded it. The choice to be that close was the variable. It was March 2023, in the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya. And this one is different, because there was no animal at all, and that is exactly why it belongs here. A group of tourists, including a German visitor, were riding in a safari minibus across the reserve on a track that had turned to mud and slick after the conditions of the day. The danger on a safari is not only the lions and the elephants, it is the assumption that the people transporting you and the vehicles they use are held to a standard that matches the risk. The minibus they were riding in was described as lacking the safety features of a proper road vehicle, and it was traveling on a hazardous, mud-slicked track. The vehicle skidded. It veered off the track and rolled. At least one German tourist was killed, and others were seriously injured in the crash. There was no charge, no attack, no defensive animal. There was a vehicle that should not have been operating the way it was, on terrain that demanded caution, carrying people who had no way of knowing the standard of the equipment they were sitting in. The incident raised serious concerns about the safety of tour vehicles in the reserve, and it stands as a reminder that the careless decisions on a safari are not always made by the tourist with the camera. Sometimes they are made by the operators who cut corners, who use the wrong vehicle, who push across a dangerous track to keep a schedule. The lesson here is quieter than a trampling, but it is just as real. A safari is a wild environment in every sense, and the failure to respect that environment, whether by a tourist on foot or by an operator on a muddy road, ends the same way. No animal did anything in this case. The wild simply was what it always is, indifferent and unforgiving, and the people who underestimated it paid for it. It was a safari in a water-rich part of Africa, the kind dotted with rivers and pools where hippos rule, when a tourist named Lisa learned that the most dangerous animal in the water is rarely the one people fear. The exact date and location were not fully recorded, but the heart of this case is documented in detail because of what happened afterward. Hippos kill more people in Africa than lions, leopards, and most of the predators tourists travel to see, and they do it from the water, defending it, charging anything that comes too close. Lisa's group was near the water, with hippos present, and according to the account that later emerged, the guides allowed the group to get too close and did not keep the guests properly back. A hippo reacted the way a hippo does to a perceived intrusion near its water. It attacked. Lisa suffered catastrophic injuries and died. What sets this case apart from the others is that the failure was not hers alone. Her husband later filed a lawsuit alleging that the guides had allowed unsafe proximity to the hippos and had then walked ahead, leaving the guests exposed and unsupervised at the worst possible moment. If those allegations hold, this is as much a guide failure case as a tourist failure case. a reminder that the people you trust to keep distance for you must actually do it. The lawsuit became a major part of the public record, and it raises the uncomfortable point that respecting the wild is a chain, and every link has to hold. A tourist trusts a guide trusts a system, and when any part of that chain decides the rules can bend for a closer look at the hippos, someone dies. The incident was preventable in the same single line as all the others. Stay back from hippos. The distance was not kept by whoever was responsible for keeping it. The hippo was never the problem. It defended its water exactly as hippos do. The proximity, however it was allowed, was the variable, and Lisa is the one who paid for it. And then there is the last one, the one that closes this out, and on paper it should never have happened, because the rule it broke is the single most fundamental rule of every safari on the continent. Remain inside the vehicle near predators. That is the rule. There is no asterisk on it, no exception for a quick shot, no version of it that allows for stepping out near a lion. The tourist at the center of this final case, an adult whose name was never released, was on a safari in an African reserve, with a lion close by. We do not know every detail, and that is part of what makes it land the way it does, because the detail that matters is the only one we have. The person got out of the vehicle, or leaned out of it, in a way that brought them into the immediate space of the lion, and near a lion, there is no margin. A lion does not need a long run, does not need a clear provocation, does not need time. It reacts to a person outside the vehicle as prey or as a threat, and either way the result is the same. The lion attacked and fatally mauled the tourist. The thing the coverage emphasized, the thing that should sit with anyone watching, is that the person's own actions left no time for rescue. No guide could reach them. No vehicle could intervene. The moment they crossed the line that separates inside from outside, the outcome was already decided, in a fraction of a second, by an animal doing exactly what its instincts demand. The death was presented as a preventable violation of the most basic safari norm there is, and the lion was not reported killed, because the lion had done nothing that any lion wouldn't do. This is the one nobody saw coming, not because the danger was hidden, but because no one could quite believe a person would do the one thing they are told, above all else, never to do. The lion was never the problem. It reacted to a human in its space the way an apex predator always will. The person who stepped out was the variable. It was the morning of Sunday, the 7th of July 2024, near the Bakgatla Gate at Pilanesberg National Park in South Africa's northwest province. Carlos Luna was 43, a tourist from Zaragoza in Spain, traveling that day with his fiancée and 2 other women. He was the kind of man who treated the rules printed at the gate as decoration. Stay inside the vehicle. Do not approach the animals. To Carlos, those words were for nervous people, not for him. By the lake ahead, a breeding herd of African elephants was feeding, 3 young calves among them, the most protective configuration an elephant herd can be in. And Carlos had his camera in his hand, already lifting it. He wanted the photo on foot. He stepped out of the vehicle. Immediately, the people in his own group shouted at him to get back inside. From at least 2 other nearby vehicles, tourists and guides shouted the same warning across the open ground. Get back in. Do not approach. He kept walking toward the herd, closing the distance for a closer frame. The elephants reacted exactly the way a breeding herd reacts to a human on foot near its calves. They turned. They charged. Carlos finally understood, and he turned to sprint back to the vehicle, but he never let go of the camera. Even then, even running for his life with it still gripped in his hand, he didn't make it. He was knocked down and trampled, and he died at the scene from crushing injuries. The whole attack lasted about 30 seconds, start to finish, in full view of his fiancée and the other tourists who had been screaming at him to stop. Park authorities confirmed afterward that he had ignored repeated warnings, and they called the incident entirely preventable. One ranger described what Carlos did, plainly, as a very stupid thing to do. The official position was that the elephants would not be harmed, because they had done nothing abnormal, The elephants were never the problem. They were a breeding herd, protecting their young, behaving exactly as African elephants behave when a stranger walks toward their calves on foot. Carlos was the variable. The herd simply removed it. If you're already talking back at the screen, wondering how a grown man ignores that many people shouting the same warning, subscribe and stay with me, because it only gets harder to explain. It was 2018, on a safari vehicle somewhere in Tanzania, when a tourist decided a wild lion was a petting opportunity. The clip surfaced and was reported in mid-June of that year, and it spread under a title that needs no explanation: Dumbest Tourist Ever. The man's name was never made public, which feels almost fitting because he became less a person than a symbol. An adult male lion was lying in the shade right against the open side of the safari truck, doing what habituated lions do, ignoring the vehicle entirely, tolerating its presence because the vehicle had never been a threat. Every guide on Earth teaches the same rule: keep your arms and your hands inside. Never lean out. Never, under any circumstances, touch a predator. This man looked at a fully grown lion within arm's reach and saw a photo op. He reached down out of the open side and patted the lion on the back, stroking it as if it were a sleeping dog on a porch. And here is the deceptive part, the thing that makes the footage so unsettling to safari professionals. The lion tolerated it. It didn't lunge. It didn't roar. The scene looked, for a few seconds, almost gentle, and that gentleness is the trap, because a lion that tolerates a touch 1 second can remove your hand the next, and there is no warning before it happens. He was not injured. No attack occurred in the clip. But guides who watched it afterward were blunt. The man had voluntarily placed his hand on a wild apex predator. A small sound, a sudden movement, a shift in the lion's mood, and that pat becomes a fatal bite faster than anyone in the vehicle could react. The clip became a teaching example, passed around among safari operators as the exact behavior every pre-tour briefing is designed to prevent. The lion was never the problem. It did precisely what a tolerant, habituated lion does, which is nothing, right up until the moment it chooses to do something. This man simply gambled that the moment wouldn't come while his hand was on its spine. He happened to win that bet. That's all it was. A bet he had no business making. It was 2024, on the Kilimanjaro Safaris ride at Disney's Animal Kingdom in Florida, where the animals are real, even if the setting is a theme park. The guest was an adult male, never named publicly, and he was the kind of man who decided that a moving vehicle full of live African wildlife was a reasonable place to relieve himself. The ride runs a fixed route through large open habitats, holding giraffes, antelope, crocodiles, and more, all of it behaving normally while trucks pass through. The rules could not be simpler. Remain seated. Stay inside the vehicle at all times. Do not enter the habitats. While the truck was still moving, this man jumped, a drop of 5 to 6 feet, off the vehicle and into the restricted habitat area, walking into the bushes to urinate near live animals. Then he ran back to the truck and tried to climb aboard. A cast member told him not to reboard. He forced his way back on anyway, in front of a vehicle full of stunned riders, and as he climbed, he offered the line that made the whole thing go viral. "I'm super sorry. I had to." The video spread across TikTok and X within hours. He wasn't physically harmed, but he had created a genuine hazard, placing himself among live animals and moving vehicles in an active operational zone where neither the animals nor the trucks expect a human on the ground. Disney-focused outlets noted that guests who leave ride vehicles in restricted areas are typically removed from the park and often permanently banned. The animals weren't the problem. They were doing nothing but existing in their habitat. He inserted a human body into a space designed to keep humans out, and apologized to the truck instead of the animals he'd just walked among. It was also 2024, at the same Disney's Animal Kingdom safari attraction, when another guest decided the fixed route wasn't close enough. This one was shared on Instagram by a travel advisor who used it as a cautionary example for clients, with the simple caption that a man had gotten off the safari truck really close to the open enclosure. The truck runs its route past open animal habitats, and the safety expectation is absolute. Stay in the vehicle in restricted areas. Do not approach or enter the enclosures. This man climbed down from the truck and walked to the fence line of the open enclosure, standing within a few steps of the boundary, apparently to look more closely or pose for a photo, before he was told to return. No attack is shown in the clip. No injury occurred. But observers watching it noticed exactly how close he was standing to live animals inside an active habitat zone, separated from whatever was on the other side by a boundary that was never designed to stop a determined adult who decided to get out and lean in. The travel advisor who posted it framed it precisely as the behavior they warn their clients about, the small step over the line that people take because nothing has gone wrong yet. Commenters speculated, correctly, that this is the kind of stunt that gets a guest removed or banned. The animals here were never the problem. They were behaving normally in a managed habitat on a fixed route. He was the one who left the route, the one who treated a clearly marked boundary as a suggestion, the one who turned a passive ride into a personal dare. It was an unspecified African safari, the date not recorded, when a tourist looked at a calf and saw something harmless. The case appears in a compilation of safari incidents, the individual never named, the location not pinned down, but the pattern is unmistakable and old as safaris themselves. There was a young animal, a calf, the kind of sight that softens people, makes them forget that a calf is never alone, that somewhere close by are adults who will defend it without hesitation. The guide's instruction was clear. Do not exit the jeep. Do not approach the young animals. Stay in the vehicle. This tourist exited without permission and walked toward the calf at close range, treating it as a gentle photo opportunity, as if the baby's vulnerability somehow extended to its mother. It does not. In the wild, proximity to the young is the single fastest way to provoke the adults. The protective animals reacted, and the tourist was mauled. The injuries serious enough that the case earned a place in a compilation of severe safari incidents. The investigation referenced afterward confirmed the obvious. The client had exited the vehicle without authorization and approached a young animal, and it was ruled a preventable incident, with the blame placed squarely on the guest's non-compliance. The animals weren't the problem. A protective adult charging a stranger near its calf is not aggression, it's parenthood. The tourist had read a calf's harmlessness and assumed it covered the whole family. It never does. The adults did exactly what their species does. He was the variable that walked into the middle of it. It was, again, an unspecified African river in the same compilation, the date unknown, the woman's name not recorded, when a client decided a crocodile river was a scenic spot for a closer look. She was on a guided safari, and the area was known, specifically and explicitly, as a crocodile hotspot, the kind of water where Nile crocodiles lie in wait, motionless, patient, perfectly evolved ambush predators that you simply do not see until it is far too late. The guide warned her, "Do not go to the water's edge. Stay back. Stay near the vehicle. This is crocodile country." She wanted to get closer to nature. She wanted the photo, or just the feeling of standing by the water. She got out and walked toward the river anyway. A crocodile took her at the edge, the strike instantaneous, the way crocodile strikes always are, and she suffered severe injuries described as mauling. The investigation noted that the safari operation had allowed her to leave the vehicle and approach the water despite the known crocodile density, though the guide had given the verbal warning she chose to override. It was framed, like all the others, as preventable. The crocodile was never the problem. It was lying in its own river, doing the one thing crocodiles have done for 100 million years, waiting at the edge of the water for something to come within reach. She came within reach. The absurd, repeated lesson of these stories is that a crocodile river is among the most strictly forbidden places on any safari, and people keep treating them like picnic grounds. The water did exactly what that water always does. It was an unspecified safari location, the date, again unknown, when a tourist stepped out of the Jeep and walked toward a group of lions to get dramatic footage. The footage exists in a montage labeled, fittingly, "Can't Fix Stupid." The man's name isn't given, and honestly, the name is the least interesting detail. There were lions lying in the grass, watching, the way lions do, territorial and capable of becoming defensive in an instant. The guide's orders were repeated and unambiguous. Guests do not get out of the Jeep near big cats. Park rules forbid approaching lions on foot, anywhere, for any reason. This man stepped out of the Jeep and walked several meters toward the lions, trying to film or pose closer to them, betting that the distance he was closing didn't matter. It mattered. He was attacked or driven back to the vehicle, the injuries severe enough to count as a mauling, the medical outcome not fully detailed but plainly bad. The narration around the case makes the point that investigations into these incidents almost always land on guest non-compliance, and that operators can face stricter rules and fines when their clients step out of vehicles and onto a predator's ground. The lions were never the problem. They were resting in their own territory, tolerating a vehicle at a distance, as lions will. The moment a human shape detached from that vehicle and began walking toward them on foot, every instinct they have reclassified him from background to threat. He volunteered to be reclassified. The lions simply responded to what he had become, but the last one is the one that should have been the easiest to avoid, because the animal in it isn't a predator at all, and that is exactly why it's so dangerous. It was an unspecified African waterhole, the date not recorded, the man's name not given, and at first glance it looks like the tamest scene in this entire account. Large herbivores, grazing and resting near the water, possibly hippos, possibly buffalo, the kind of animals that people see and immediately downgrade in their heads to something like cattle. Big, slow, harmless. The guide's instructions stood anyway. Do not leave the vehicle near these animals, especially here, at the water's edge, where they are most easily provoked. And this is where the human mind betrays people on safari, because everyone braces for the lion and nobody braces for the buffalo. This man stepped out of the Jeep and moved toward the herbivores at the water's edge to get closer footage, treating them like docile livestock that happened to be standing in a river. They are not livestock. In park after park across Africa, hippos and buffalo kill more people every year than lions do, by a wide margin, precisely because they don't look the part, and so people walk right up to them. The herd reacted. He was charged, knocked down, and seriously injured. The case preserved as an example of the deadliest misjudgment on safari, which is underestimating the animal that doesn't have fangs. The investigation framed it as exactly that, a pattern of clients, and sometimes underexperienced guides, misreading non-carnivores as safe and paying for it. The animals were never the problem. A hippo defending its water, or a buffalo defending its space, is not malice. It's the most ordinary thing those animals do. He looked at the most lethal animals in the park and saw a petting zoo. They corrected him in seconds. And that is the cruel symmetry running through every one of these stories. The predator that looks dangerous and the herbivore that looks safe will both remove a human who walks up to them on foot, because to the animal, there is no difference between a tourist and a threat. There is only the shape that left the vehicle. It was 2026, at a roadside wildlife viewing area inside Yellowstone National Park. The man was young, somewhere in his 20s or 30s, and he was the kind of visitor who treats a national park like a petting zoo. He had walked into Yellowstone past the same map and the same flyer that every single car receives at the gate, the one that says in plain print to stay at least 25 yards from bison and never to feed or approach them. He read it the way that type of person always reads a rule, as advice for the tourists, not for him. The strange detail is what he carried in his hand. Not a camera, not a phone held at arm's length, a plant. He had picked something green from the ground and decided he was going to offer it to a fully grown American bison, the way you might coax a pony over a fence. The bison was simply standing and grazing near the road, calm but alert, doing nothing more threatening than existing. The man closed the distance until only a few feet separated his open hand from an animal that can outrun a horse. He held the plant out. He waited. He tried again. The bison lifted its head and grew visibly bothered, that slow, heavy shift of weight that anyone who has spent time near large animals learns to fear. Around him, other visitors were reacting out loud, audibly alarmed, and yet still filming rather than stepping in, because by now the man was so close that pulling him back would have put them in range too. On this day, the animal did not charge. The consequence here was a wave of public backlash that followed the footage everywhere it traveled, with bystanders and viewers alike calling him exactly what he was. The incident was, by every standard the park sets, entirely preventable. He approached and tried to feed a wild bison after being told in writing not to. The bison was never the problem. It was grazing in its own home, behaving exactly as a bison behaves. The man was the variable, and he was lucky the variable did not cost him his life. If you are already talking back at the screen, you are not alone. So do subscribe and stay with me, because the next one is even harder to explain. It was also 2026, near Floating Island Lake in the northern stretch of Yellowstone, and it was witnessed by a man named Les Vandiver, who had pulled over hoping to spot a bear. Instead, he watched a herd of bison crossing the road, moving as a group at the steady, unbothered pace these animals keep when nobody interferes with them. They were doing the most ordinary thing in the world. They were getting from one side to the other. Then a young man opened the back passenger door of a vehicle and ran straight at them. Not toward the edge of the herd. Straight at the crossing. Vandiver could not find a single sensible reason for it, settling on the words that fit best, that the young man was just doing something stupid, maybe trying to spook the animals off the road. Think for a second about what running at a herd of bison actually invites. These are animals that weigh as much as a small car, that can pivot and accelerate faster than a person ever could, and that crossing a road in a group are exactly the kind of stressed, bunched-up animals most likely to turn on a threat. The young man had been handed the same warnings as everyone else. Stay in the vehicle. Keep your distance. Never run toward wildlife or interfere with animals crossing a road. He ignored all of it for a stunt that lasted a few seconds. The herd reacted the way startled herds do, quickening their pace and pushing through to finish the crossing. The young man, perhaps surprised the animals did not simply scatter for him, turned around, climbed back into the vehicle, and left. No injuries that day, no citation that anyone could find. Just a witness shaking his head and a story that became part of a wider article on tourist recklessness. The herd was never the problem. They sped up to escape a person sprinting at them, which is precisely what frightened animals do. The young man was the variable, and the only reason he walked away is that the herd chose flight over fight. It was 2025, on a paved stretch of road inside the park, and this time the reckless choice came dressed for a photograph. A woman in a flowing, ankle-length dress crossed the road on foot toward a single bison that observers described as bothered and agitated, standing near the road and guarding its own space. She did not stop at a safe distance. She did not stop at an unsafe distance. She walked right up to within a few feet of the animal, and then she did the one thing every guide and every sign begs people never to do. She turned her back on it. She faced away from a creature heavier than her car and posed, apparently for a photo or a selfie, with the bison directly behind her shoulder. Commentators who later dissected the clip kept returning to the same maddening point. Nearly every camera made today can zoom. Every phone in her pocket could have captured that animal from across the road. There was no reason, none, to stand within arm's length of 2,000 pounds of muscle and turn away from it, except the belief that the danger applied to other people. That is the flaw that runs through every story in this video, and she wore it like that dress. The park rules she ignored are not subtle. Stay 25 yards back. Never approach a bison on foot. And never, under any circumstances, turn your back on large wildlife, because you lose the half-second of warning that might save you. In the clip that traveled across the internet, the animal did not lunge in that exact moment. and she walked away believing nothing had been wrong with her judgment. But people in the comment sections and the commentary breakdowns knew better, because they had seen what this same posture leads to when the animal does decide to move. The footage now circulates as a warning, a freeze frame of everything you are told not to do. The bison was never the problem. It was standing in its space, agitated by an intruder, doing nothing a bison would not do. She was the variable, and she gambled her life on the animal's patience. It was the 20th of May, 2023, in the Lamar Valley, and this is the story that proves good intentions can be just as deadly as arrogance. Clifford Walters, an adult man visiting from Hawaii, came across a newborn bison calf that had become separated from its herd and ended up in or near a river. Most people, reading the same rules Walters had, would have understood the hard truth printed in park guidance. Leave young animals alone, even when they look distressed, because a calf that smells of human hands is a calf the herd may abandon. Walters did not leave it alone. He waded in, took hold of the newborn, and physically pulled it from the river up onto the roadway, carrying it toward the very thing it needed to stay away from, people and traffic. In his mind, he was the rescuer. In reality, he had just signed the calf's death warrant. The herd, doing exactly what wild bison do when human scent contaminates one of their own, rejected the calf. Cut off from its mother and its herd, the newborn began approaching cars and people on the road, drawn to the only company it had left, which made it a public safety hazard with no safe outcome. Yellowstone officials, unable to reintegrate it into the herd, were left with one option. They euthanized the calf. A newborn animal died because a man decided the rules about touching wildlife did not account for his compassion. Walters was charged in federal court and pleaded guilty to one count of feeding, touching, teasing, frightening, or intentionally disturbing wildlife. He was fined $500, ordered to pay another $500 to the Yellowstone Wildlife Protection Fund, plus fees. The incident was classified as entirely preventable. He handled and moved a newborn calf, despite an explicit prohibition on touching young animals. And here is the line that hurts the most. The herd was never the problem. They rejected the calf because it carried the scent of a human who would not keep his hands to himself. The calf was never the problem either. Clifford Walters was the variable, and his rescue is the reason that calf is dead. It was June 2025, around 9:45 in the morning, in the Old Faithful area, which is the most crowded, most heavily signposted, most thoroughly warned corner of the entire park. A 30-year-old man from Randolph, New Jersey, was part of a sizable group of visitors near the boardwalks and thermal basins, where prominent signs and ranger guidance remind everyone, constantly, to keep 25 yards from bison. There was an adult bison nearby, part of a herd, at first stationary or moving slowly, behaving like an animal that simply wanted to be left to graze. The group did the thing crowds do. They drifted closer. They closed the distance for a better view, for a better photo, each person trusting that the wall of other people somehow made it safer. It does not. A bison does not see a crowd as a safe number. It sees a wall of intruders crowding into its space, and at some point the animal decided it had endured enough. It charged, suddenly and with the explosive speed these animals hide behind their lumbering appearance, and it gored the 30-year-old man from New Jersey. He suffered injuries that park officials described as minor. He was treated, and he survived, which makes him one of the luckier people in this video. There was no record of citations for the group, and no lethal action against the bison, which remained in the park where it belonged. What makes this one sting is the location. This happened in the one place where the warnings are loudest, where the signs are most numerous, where you genuinely cannot move through the area without being reminded to keep your distance. And still, a group closed in until an animal had to make its point with its skull. The incident was preventable in the plainest possible way. The man's group ignored the 25-yard rule in the most controlled part of the park. The bison was never the problem. It gave a defensive response to people crowding it, exactly what bison do. The group was the variable, and the man wore the consequence. It was July 2019, again near Old Faithful, and this story is the clearest proof that the danger is rarely about one careless individual. It is about a crowd that decides, together, that the rules do not apply to a group having a nice time. A bison was grazing near a path in a mixed-use tourist area, and a crowd of roughly 40 to 50 people gathered around it, not at 25 yards. Far closer, surrounding the animal, hemming it in, the way you would crowd a statue rather than a wild creature with horns and a temper. Adults and children alike stood and filmed, treating the bison as a backdrop. The entire group silently agreeing that nothing could go wrong, because look how many of us there are. Among them was a 9-year-old girl, there with her family, doing what every other person around her was doing, which was standing far too close to an animal that was running out of patience. It gored her and flipped her into the air. She was injured, but, mercifully, she survived and was treated at a clinic. The animal was not euthanized because the park recognized it for what it was, a predictable response to being surrounded by 50 people. Officials used the event to hammer home the point about crowding. The incident was entirely preventable. A crowd surrounded a bison well inside the safe distance, and a child paid for the decision the adults made. The bison was never the problem. It charged because dozens of people had boxed it in, which is exactly what a cornered bison does. The crowd was the variable, and the youngest person in it took the blow. It was around 2020, in a parking area of the park, and this one comes wrapped in a clip that warns everyone watching exactly what is about to happen. A woman walked up extremely close to a huge bison, within a few feet, and posed for a selfie with her back to the animal. As she did it, other visitors were shouting at her to move away, their voices clear on the recording, telling her in real time that she was in danger. She ignored them. She held her position with the bison shifting and showing agitation behind her, because the picture mattered more than the warnings of every stranger within earshot. The man narrating the footage made the contrast unforgettable. He was filming the same animal safely, from a long distance, using a telephoto lens, the way responsible wildlife photography is actually done, while this woman stood within arm's reach and turned her spine to a creature that could kill her in a single motion. That is the entire lesson of this video, in one frame. One person used the right tool from a safe distance. The other gambled her life for a closer shot she did not need. Commentary around the clip tied it directly to recent goring incidents, including descriptions of a tourist launched roughly 20 feet through the air by a bison that had finally had enough. Whether the woman in this exact selfie was the same person who was launched is not certain, but the point does not depend on it, because the scenario is identical and it plays out, somewhere in this park, every single season. When a bison does attack a person like this, the consequences can fall on the animal too, with euthanasia or relocation considered for public safety, which means her selfie could have cost the bison its life as well as her own. The incident was preventable from the first step. She stood within a few feet of a bison and turned her back on it, despite people screaming at her to stop. The bison was never the problem. It was agitated by an intruder who would not retreat. She was the variable, and she had every warning she could possibly need, shouted at her out loud. It was around 2024, at a roadside pullout, and this one is less about a single person and more about the moment a whole group decides the wild is theirs to walk into. A vehicle full of tourists stopped near a stretch where bison and other large animals were present, and instead of staying inside the car or behind a barrier, the group got out and clustered close for an extended viewing and photo session. The footage was shared with a caption blunt enough to leave no room for misunderstanding, listing the animals that share this landscape: bears, bison, elk, moose, and wolves, and stating plainly that every one of them is a wild animal capable of seriously injuring or killing people who get too close. That caption is the whole point. The danger here was not hidden or surprising. It was obvious, spelled out in writing, and ignored anyway. The bison in this clip were simply present near the road, doing nothing, behaving completely normally, which is exactly what makes the group's choice so reckless. They were not reacting to an aggressive animal. They were creating the conditions for an aggressive encounter by closing the distance the rules are designed to keep open. The guidance they ignored is the same thread running through every story you have heard. Stay in the vehicle. Keep behind the barriers. Hold 25 yards from large wildlife. No physical injury was reported for this particular group, which means they fall into the same category as the man with the plant and the man who ran at the herd, people who got away with it and probably told themselves that proved it was safe. It does not. It proves only that the animals were patient that day. The footage now serves as a teaching tool for park communicators trying to explain a risk that is somehow obvious and ignored at the same time. The incident was preventable in its entirety. They left their vehicle and stood close to wildlife instead of holding the distance. The animals were never the problem. They were standing in their own home, behaving normally. The group was the variable, and the only thing protecting them was luck. But the last one is not a single moment. It is the pattern behind every story you have heard, and it is the one nobody quite sees coming, because it reveals that none of these were isolated mistakes. Across Yellowstone, from at least 2019 through 2025, across the Lamar Valley, Hayden Valley, the Old Faithful boardwalks, and pullouts everywhere in between, the same behavior repeats season after season. People walk into the middle of herds for photographs. They approach newborn calves. They block animals' paths with their cars. They handle young wildlife and carry it off as if they have been appointed its guardian. And the records show this is not an occasional bad apple. It is a steady, recurring habit of treating wild animals as props and pets. The strangest detail in all of it is how far the so-called helping goes. People have not only carried a bison calf up a riverbank, costing that calf its life. They have driven a baby elk to a police station and taken other young animals into restaurants and hotels, genuinely believing they were doing a kindness. Every one of these acts begins with the same flaw, a person convinced that the rules and the science behind them do not account for their special understanding of the situation. Many of these incidents end without injury, which is exactly why they keep happening, because each near miss is mistaken for proof of safety. But the pattern also produces the real consequences you have already seen. A euthanized calf, a gored man near Old Faithful, a 9-year-old girl thrown into the air. The park responds the only way it can, by updating its messaging, producing video after video, posting warning after warning, and reserving prosecution for the most egregious cases like the calf handling. Yet the flyers still get folded into glove boxes, and the line still gets crossed. The animals were never the problem in any of these stories. The bison crossed roads, guarded calves, grazed in meadows, and defended their space, doing exactly what their species does and has always done. The variable, every single time, was a person who knew the rule and decided it was meant for someone else.
If you think these people should have known better, the next ones are even harder to believe. You can click the video on your screen to go straight there. For now, take care of yourselves out there and have a great day.